Hello, and welcome to the Psych and Business Podcast, where we highlight the integration of psychology and psychological principles into the world of business and organizations. I'm your host, Dr. Ernest Wayde. All right, very excited today. We have some very special guests. That's right, I said two very special guests. We have with us Dr. John Reed, who is one of the very first guests that we've had on the show. And we also have with us Dr. Karyn Edwards, who is a more recent guest that you might have heard of. If you haven't seen their individual episodes, I highly recommend that you go back and listen to them. They have some really great stories as to how they came into this work, as well as the work that they do. So make sure you definitely go and listen to that. Today, though, we're going to be focusing on a great article that they've written, and it's called A Comprehensive Guide to Picking an Executive Coach. And they're here to talk about it, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So John, Karyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ernest. Thanks so much for having me back. I'm so excited to be here. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Ernest. You're doing a great service to the coaching industry, coaching consumers, and we're very grateful.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you both for coming back on the show. I want to dive right into it because this is such an interesting article. And I always want to start with why, especially now that we're trying to talk about the need for leadership development and leadership coaching and things like that. Tell us why you think this article is important, what really drove you and motivated you to write this article, and why you think it's really relevant at this time. And Karyn, I'd love if you would kick us off, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So the why is a deep answer to that question. So why is because I actually met John through the Marshall Goldsmith Forefront program. So he became my mentor, and through learning about the work that he had done in writing his book on how do you select an executive coach, I was really intrigued about just the whole concept related to the quality of coaches and how to help businesses navigate a very significant investment that they're often making in coaching. And what I found through the work that I've been doing is there isn't really a lot of guidance out there on how to do that. And so I thought that John's work was really important. So I actually teed it up with him to do a presentation at the ATD conference on the topic. And he was more than willing to let me run with that. And ATD unfortunately didn't have us present, but they did offer us an opportunity to write the article. And so we jumped at that chance and co-wrote that together. John, please embellish on your why. We put that together.
First, I'd like to say that Karyn is characteristically maybe understating her strength and orientation here because, yes, I gave her use of the book for doing the presentation that she did, but her presentation was so strong and effective that it is that which led to the invitation to write this article. And she very kindly included me in that, which is why I wanted her most assuredly to be the first author on this. And I think we are both very aware, based on a lot of experience, of the, let's just say, the variable quality in what is a very fast-growing, multi-billion-dollar industry. The quality, I would say, is a little bit better on average. But at the same time, because of social media and a variety of other things, the guardrails against low quality in the market in many respects are lowered as opposed to where they were even 10 years ago when I wrote an initial book about it. And so this article is nice and concise and digestible and easily absorbed by consumers. And it's also easily absorbed by people who are trying to think about and planning ahead for their own training to become the best possible executive coach. So I'm very grateful to Karyn for including me in this effort. And it was a lot of fun to put it together with her.
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about before we started recording was the difference between quality and sizzle, right? In terms of when trying to identify coaches. And I think as you're talking about, John, there's so much in the media about this sort of work. And it's really hard for anybody. Sometimes it's even hard for us as professionals to identify what quality means, right? What is highly effective coaching and what does it look like? And so I appreciate that this article really kind of addresses that. One of the things that I was really interested about when I read the article was you have in there business depth and education, but you also have in there psychology depth and education. Can you talk about why that's important, how that fits into the business aspect? John, I'd love it if you'd lead us off on this one.
Oh, sure. Well, I think just from my experience starting about 20 years ago, I didn't realize how lucky I was as a psychologist entering into this field, which didn't even have a name. It was coaching, but because psychological training in general is such an excellent foundation for tracking and understanding what happens with coaching clients. Coaching is not the same as therapy, and I'm not licensed as a clinical psychologist, although I've had quite a lot of clinical training. But being able to understand how behavior change can be facilitated, what the barriers or obstacles or challenges are, what adult development actually means across the lifespan, what, in a very simple sense, what anxiety, in some cases depression or other stressors look like in the person across from you. And that's just skimming the surface. All of that is, at least in my work, very important. But I really didn't appreciate how lucky I was to come into the field with business and psychology training. I have to say the other thing that was very apparent when I, back at the turn of the century when I came into it was the absence of those two things in a lot of people, along with actual coaching training, the absence of those things in people who were moving into the field. And some of them perfectly good intentions. They wanted to be helpful.
Yeah.
And I think that's wonderful, but it'd be sort of like me saying, I want to be a brain surgeon starting tomorrow. And so just hand me the scalpel and I'll get after it. If you don't know what you're doing, your impact is kind of limited.
Yeah, I love that, highlighting the importance of understanding human behavior and how that impacts, like you mentioned across the lifespan, and how that impacts your behavior as a leader now, and how that's really important to have a good depth and understanding on that. Karyn, I'd love your perspective on this as well.
Yeah, I think when you get to a certain level of leadership, because John and I are generally talking about people that are at the more senior levels in organizations, and we're talking about executive coaching, and they are already technically competent. So they wouldn't be in those roles if they didn't know the business, if they didn't know the industry, if they didn't know the fundamentals of their roles. And what I think we find, and where psychology is handy, is everyone, including us, all of us, have blind spots and things that we, throughout our entire life, keep working on. And we develop all these compensatory strategies. How do we be more effective with this? And we kind of build an area up, and another area might become a deficit, depending on the role in the company and industry that you're in. And so a coach can really, that has a background, that has the education and has the experience, can really help you uncover those things and figure out strategies that are going to work now. And so I think I'm an IO psychologist. So in terms of the study of how people function in the workplace, it's both at an individual and a team level. And so I think having that background as a coach is really important and really beneficial, especially to people who are really working on these more significant levels within an organization.
Yeah.
It makes a huge difference having that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We're really talking about those really high levels of leadership, that C-suite executives, really making sure that they have that psychological experience as well. Talking about psychology, one of the things that really struck me when I was reading the article was your focus on that ethical mastery, right? That importance of having that ethical perspective as well. And as psychologists, we have the APA, which has its ethics code, right? What are your thoughts on coaches who aren't psychologists and don't have to adhere to the APA code? What should leaders be looking for in terms of ethics from that point of view if they don't have that APA guideline to help them?
Yeah, I think so. The ICF, and there's other credentialing bodies. I think in the article we talk mostly about the ICF, but I would say that would be another thing to look for. Does a coach have coach education with an ICF credential organization? Because the ICF has ethics and confidentiality guidelines within their bylaws as well that coaches need to adhere to. And there's a process if there's some kind of violation of that people can go through. I think that's incredibly important. It's probably the number one thing John can confirm is people talk to us when we kick off coaching engagements about confidentiality. It is a common topic of discussion is where is all this information going to go? Who is going to hear updates? How is that going to happen? And so a coach also needs to, an executive coach needs to have a process well outlined about who gets what information. And because it does happen, right? We get phone calls and people want to know, hey, how's so-and-so doing? And you have to have a process and a well-rehearsed way of handling those situations because they do come up. And keeping that trust with the client is of paramount importance because that is just crucial to their development overall. John, what would you add?
I couldn't agree with Karyn's insights more, Ernest. And it's when I started, I thought, well, of course, basic dyad of the coachee and the coach, that with the exception of, the duty to warn provisions, if coach says I'm here tomorrow to blow up the building, you have to do something about that. What I've since found out, and I know Karyn experiences all the time, and you probably do too, Ernest, is in something as simple as 360 feedback.
Yeah.
I was, particularly if you do 360 feedback qualitatively by interview, which is what I like to do. And I had this experience last week with a senior hospital executive who's a fairly aggressive person and who said, I'd done 12 interviews, summarized the interviews, given her the thematic anonymous summary. And she said, listen, would you go back and would you segment the feedback coming from my peers and my seniors and my reports so that I can understand, which on the surface seemed like a very logical sort of thing to request. But I said, actually, I can't, because that in some ways would be, since there was a fairly small number of people involved, that would be targeting certain people in certain ways. So there's another example of wanting to balance being helpful and responsive to all parties involved, but at the same time, and I think it was more the APA ethics code than the ICF ethics code that in particular informed that. This concept of confidentiality is multifaceted, at least in my experience.
Yeah, John, the example of the 360 reminds me of when I used to work for the government. We had a rule that you needed to have at least 5 individuals to try to protect the confidentiality of the individuals of that group that was providing feedback. Otherwise, it would make it really easy for the leader to identify specifically who said what. And so really making sure that we're maintaining those confidentialities is really critical. John, I know that one of the things that you've talked about before, and I think is really interesting to bring up here as well, is readiness for coaching, right? Making sure that we're not just taking or recommending coaching or trying to get coaching, but also thinking about where that leader is in terms of their readiness. Can you talk a little bit about that and how someone can also try to make sure that they are ready for coaching so that they're not wasting their time and the coach's time?
Sure. And I'm sure Karyn has a lot of experience to draw from on this also, Ernest. But coincidentally, this past fall, doing a webinar with the Marshall Goldsmith organization, we talked a bit about that, and I provided a sort of a one-page guide, 10 questions or so, that someone could look at to use to determine if they or their client are in a good place to begin coaching. And actually, in some cases, to disqualify or at least postpone coaching, basic things like, do you really think coaching will make a difference for you? And if it does, why is that important to you, right? Because coaching is kind of a sexy, cool thing that lots of people are getting. I've had situations where people just think, I'd like coaching. And if I ask the basic question that I think we all do, which is to some degree, hey, if we could do a spectacular job, if we could hit a home run in coaching, what would you like to see 6 months from now, 12 months from now, whatever? And if I get one of those blank stares, I will at least say, look, it's always better to have a target. Let's think about, and I'm always here, but let's think about what really would make a difference for you. Another thing that's very, very simple to bring up is, look, coaching is work. Coaching is having some interesting, stimulating conversations and findings. But behavior change is work. When I was just starting out, I was so thrilled to have anybody express interest in my coaching them that I totally missed whether they were really engaged in doing any work on the behavior change goals that we
Yeah.
had. There were a couple of cases where this person wanted to be able to say that they were being coached. They didn't really want to do what was necessary to move the needle. Putting that forward and just saying, hey, look, do you have the time available in your schedule to devote? Because some coaching processes involve work in between sessions. We all know that. Are you really ready for the idea of looking carefully at what your strengths are and how to leverage them, and also to confront constructively your development areas and how to work on those? So those are just a few of the topics that you could explore with somebody to determine if they're in the right place to start coaching. Maybe one other one that comes to mind is if you're in an organization, do you have a boss, for example, who is supportive of you getting coaching, is advocating for you to stretch, to learn new things, sometimes to make
Mhm.
mistakes as you are learning those things? So if you're in that kind of environment, that's great.
Yep.
If you're in an environment where if you hiccup the wrong way, you're going to get
Mhm.
shot, not so much.
Yeah.
Karyn, do you have some additional thoughts on how you would advise people to determine if it's kind of the right time or not the right time?
Yeah, I think, a couple things that you said really resonate with me. One is there desire to change? Is there either has there been one that's been presented to you, or you have been through some awareness realized that something is you need to finesse or polish or enhance a skill set. So those two areas I find, depending on where it's coming from, is it intrinsic? Is it extrinsic? And if it's extrinsic, what are the conversations that we need to have to make sure we fully understand what's driving this desire for change, and how direct has that information come to that person? So sometimes it's veiled in lots of language and things like that, and they don't really have a clear sense of why coaching is being recommended. The other thing is it is hard work, as John said. It is, and the hard work happens in between the coaching conversations. The coaching conversations are interesting and engaging, but the work of actually applying what we're talking about or what you've decided you want to do happens in between. And the other thing is, I went through the program at the University of Texas, and Dr. Robert Hicks wrote a book about the framework that he uses for coaching. And what I recall from it and think about often is a coach has two jobs. One is we need to support the clients through the process because behavior change is hard and people need support, ideas, and all that good stuff that goes along with support.
Yeah.
But they also need challenge. So they need someone to say, you mentioned this, it doesn't sound like that was working for you. What do you want to have happen instead? And we try to focus on the future. I also think the other big thing is it's not consulting. So the reason I like working with really senior leaders is because I can't do their job. I mean, I could, I suppose, if I wanted to become a C something or other, but they're in really challenging situations. And so a lot of empathy, but at the same time, coaching is really about how do you want to handle this situation versus consulting or me telling you, here's my 5-step program for how you deal with this is not going to serve. And so it's also really understanding what coaching is,
Yeah.
I think, in terms of the readiness. And then again, is it intrinsic or extrinsically?
Yeah, Karyn, I love that you brought that up because I want to pull on that thread a little bit more. Let's put ourselves in the mind of a leader who does not know what coaching really is and has not had coaching before, but wants to achieve a very specific business goal and has been told that they need coaching in order to help them do that. Now we're talking about coaching being, helping leaders engage in behavioral change. How are we as coaches, or what should leaders be looking for in terms of a coach that can help them understand how the behavioral change will lead to the business outcome and what that experience will be like? What should a novice leader be looking for and helping them understand?
Yeah, well, I'll start off, and then John, you can add in. So here's what I always tell people about executive coaching. It is the most highly customized type of leadership development that you will experience, because all those programs that situational leadership and all the great programs that have been out there. And they're great for lower levels of leadership where you're learning about yourself, you're learning about how people respond and get motivated and all that good stuff. But to drive results in an organization, leaders at this level have to be masterful at emotional intelligence and working through others.
Yeah.
And that's a big transition to go from doing it myself to motivating and inspiring and getting work done through other people. And so to do that, you really have to understand yourself and how you're showing up. And so I know John does too, but I use assessments as part of that. So part of explaining what happens in coaching is first is self-awareness, knowing yourself, how you're currently showing up.
Yeah.
There's different assessments that can help us understand that. And then second is, what are you trying to accomplish and what's working? We want to continue that. We want to emphasize that. And where are the areas where you're noticing there's struggle? And then the assessments can help us fill that in, as well as 360s, as well as talking with other people that they interact with on a regular basis. All of that helps paint a picture. And then we can create a plan of what are the specific behaviors that you want to work on. So again, at this level, it's all behavior. I would say it's not a lot of technical, they know how to drive results. It's just that they're sometimes doing it in a way that's offensive to other people. So got to help with that. Yeah.
If I could just tag on to what Karyn said, Ernest, I find increasingly in the work that I do, there really are maybe two channels, two things that go on in coaching engagements. One is the classic, what Karyn has just described, strengths, development areas, what's working, what's not working, how does that relate to your ultimate goals? What are we going to work on improving? The other that comes up quite a lot with senior people is that they want, I'm an ex-strategy consultant, so it's not quite the same as strategy consulting management, but they want a thought partner. They want a sounding board. They want someone who's had enough experience so that they can say, look, I have this particular employee or supplier or this particular situation that I need to navigate. I have a presentation coming up. There can be a zillion different things, but a sort of here's what's going on. What do you think about that? What would you do if you were in my shoes? What am I missing? And that I loosely would call that leadership advising, or going back to Carol Wassilishin, trusted leadership advising. What Karyn and I do, those are two channels that we are in a great deal. And again, I'd say the things that we were espousing in the article, those four sort of foundational things, are pretty critical to be able to do those.
Yeah, I would say it gets lonely at the top. And there's not a lot of people that they can just say, hey, I'm thinking about this, without, if you try to do that with your direct reports, there's a lot of energy that gets created that maybe they're not ready to create yet. And so just thinking about, if I tried this, if I tried that, and thinking through it. And because we have, in the article, we talk about this, is looking for a coach that has both the educational background, the coaching credential, right, the experience, but also the business experience.
Yeah.
Having worked in organizations and knowing all those dynamics that go on, so that we can help with, as people are thinking in that thought partnership. That's a very big component of.
Yeah, I love the importance of that thought partner, right? Which really can be someone who you can bounce ideas off it, and when they have experience in that area, it really is beneficial, to have that. You can just talk to someone who has been through it or understands what you're talking about. I think that's also very critical. The other thing that brings to mind here is the importance of that interpersonal preference when we're looking for a coach, especially as we're thinking of them also as a thought partner. How important is that, and how do you weigh that, your preference, your comfort with them after the interview, because you definitely should do an interview with them? How do you weigh that versus their experience and some of their educational background? How do you balance that well?
Well, the article and the book sort of detail a process which kind of differentiates between qualifying the person in front of you based on their experience, education, so on and so forth, in the four areas, giving them a grade, literally. The second part of that is in the infamous chemistry interview, essentially staying focused, controlling the interview. If you're the client, you're controlling the interview. You're trying to get at certain key aspects of the way the coach thinks, the way the coach approaches certain situations, what the coach tends to draw from, the coach's level of self awareness. There are about, I think in the article, we referred to maybe 50 different questions, if I'm not mistaken, Karyn, that you can be using in your coaching chemistry interview. I see less of this, but I still see a lot of the, gosh, I had the best talk with XYZ. Oh, it was great. We were laughing. We've had a lot of experiences in common. He was charming, and which is all great.
Yeah.
Nice to have chemistry. Again, there's nothing bad about that kind of chemistry if underneath it all is muscle. If underneath it all is vapor, not so good. So the point of this is just to say, great if the chemistry and the connection feels good. What else do you need to determine in this chemistry meeting of 45 minutes or an hour to really get clear about if the person has the right grades in the first phase and they pass muster in the second phase, then the odds of you having somebody who's going to deliver real value go way up. It's less of a shooting, of a tossing a beanbag somewhere and hoping it lands.
Karyn, what's your perspective on this?
So I always tell people to interview at least 3 coaches. So oftentimes, and coaching is, at least at these higher levels, is typically a referral business. I often get people that I'm coaching and they say, hey, I want to also have this other person in my organization coach. And depending on whether or not what's going on, what level that person is, if they're in some kind of direct reporting line or not, I may not be the right coach for that person. And so I refer a lot to other coaches, but I always recommend you interview 2 or 3 coaches and to understand their credentials and background. Do your homework, look them up on LinkedIn. Check out where they went to school, check out what type of organizations they've worked with, look at their website. All of those questions that John, those go into a lot of depth and detail, and it's hard to wiggle around those, right? Get people that are really good at marketing and sales, and they can sell themselves very, very effectively. We were talking about that before we started. Maybe that's not our strongest skills, but it's also something that is, it could be a mask, right? To what are you really going to get? How has this person in their other coaching engagements demonstrated results? Can you validate that? Can you verify that? Just like if you're going to hire, anybody to do work for you, you always want to check out all of that. And so I think it's a really important due diligence process because it is a significant investment of time and resources and money and energy. And so,
yeah, I think this is one of those really interesting things where it's if you're buying a product anywhere else, you'd read the reviews, you'd look it up and take what people say. When you're getting an executive coach, especially at this level, this is why I think what you mentioned, Karyn, the referral is really important because you're getting a referral from somebody that you trust. But it's also really important for that leader to do their work and make sure that they're doing their research and understanding kind of who this person is and what their experiences are. As John said, they're poking behind the vapor barrier to make sure that there's substance behind the gloss and the sizzles. I think that's one of the things that I'm taking away from this is it's really important as a leader to make sure that you are investing time and energy, making sure that the people or the person that you're looking at to work with you is substantive and knows kind of what they're doing. So just tell us again, where is this article located if people want to reach it? Because I think this is such a great article. I want to make sure that people know where to get it.
Well, you can reach out to John or I. We have copies, but it's in the January edition of the ATD magazine, and you can take a look at it.
Awesome. I always take advantage of the people that we have here and ask for a tip, right? So, Karyn, I'm going to ask you first, what's the tip that you have for the audience around executive coaching?
I'm going to go back to do your homework. So I think it's really important to look at coaches as people that have skill sets that they can really provide a lot of value. And the higher level you go, the more you need to make sure that you're picking one that has the balance of substance as well as the chemistry is important. I think both of those things.
Yeah. Do your homework, make sure they're substantive, and make sure that the chemistry is right. I love that. John?
I could do, again, I think I'm tagging on what Karyn just said, but when you're doing reference checking, I can hire someone to be a great reference, right? What I would encourage you to do if you're a prospective buyer of coaching is dig in the conversation with the reference to understand how they arrived at their decision what criteria they used, what they looked at. What did you think of the person's training in X, Y, and Z, those 4 areas? What did you think of the person in terms of personality, communication style, willingness to confront? What stood out for you? Don't just listen to, that I think that person did a great job,
Yeah.
which may very well be true. Why and how is what you want to know. So, because, the quality of references can vary as widely as the quality of coaches. So that would be my only caution about that.
Dig deeper is what I'm hearing, right? Dig deeper to make sure that you're understanding why the references is coming and giving that reference and recommendation.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just, buyer beware.
Yeah. Karyn and John, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this article. Really great article. Such a fantastic read and really, really needed, in my opinion, especially this day and age as we're trying to promote learning and development and coaching and all those experiences. So thank you so much for coming on.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks, Ernest.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, thanks for listening. We hope you will join us again next time.